Wow. What a privilege, what an honor to be with Ruchika Malhotra. And she is author of the newest book, her newest book, Uncompete. Yes, Uncompete. And it's about rejecting competition to unlock success. And I first got to hear Ruchika's voice when she was infamously on Brene Brown's podcast to talk about imposter syndrome, if I remember correctly. Totally changed the way I looked about imposter syndrome. And then I actually got to meet her serendipitously in the halls of Thinkers 50, a conference that they do for thought leaders, and where she goes on stage leading a panel and just has just been a trusted ally ever since. Ruchika, I'm so excited to talk with you today.
Julie, thank you so much. And you know where we met? It was very special. It was at the crypt of in London at the hall that we met in. It was this like I think 16th century building or something. And the crypt downstairs, like it was totally quiet. And I'm walking and Julie comes up to me and she's like, "Hi, are you Ruchika? Like I think I just saw you on stage." And I was like, "Yes." And it was just this really powerful moment. And then when you introduce yourself, I was like, of course I know all your work. Like I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing. And it was, I mean, it was just a very it felt very like meaningful in the midst of this giant conference to be able to like find those moments. And like now 2 years later, it's what a privilege for me to be here with you.
Oh, thank you for saying that. And thanks for being so intentional with that memory. It's stamped in my brain forever. It's
Thank you.
definitely the reason I was excited. I flew all the way to London for a conference. I know you flew all the way from Seattle, halfway across the world for it. So it just felt like what great energy. And I think sometimes when you see somebody on stage, how they show up off stage is an interesting difference. And you are so much the same, if not even more like energizing and just lifting one-on-one. And so I'm just thankful that that synergy exists and your work exists because it's so important. I know you wrote a book a few years ago that was, I know for me, a game changer, Inclusion on Purpose. And it inspired me to develop new content and curriculum for my clients. And so I've just always been so thankful for your work. And I think you see things before other people see them, which is really interesting why you chose to write Uncompete now, Ruchika. I'm curious, like, what is the why for the book? Like, when did you come up with the idea and why does it matter so much?
Thank you so much, Julie, for saying that. I'd say more than see before. I like to think that many people are seeing what I'm seeing. And I like to name it in public because there's something about like how I've always learned, which is like, are you seeing this thing I'm seeing too? Right. And or I'm seeing this, and then other people come up to me and be like, yes, like I see it too. And it's just the way that I've like processed the world since I was really young. Words have always been sort of the way that I've processed the world. But I'm really excited about Uncompete. Even though this is a very strange time to be releasing a book in the world about abundance and collaboration and solidarity, when unfortunately we're really seeing the opposite in many ways, whether it's as individuals or as, in workplaces or as a society. But the idea behind it is fairly simple, not easy at all, but fairly simple. In a world that tells us competition is the only way to be successful, it's rejecting that idea and choosing a different way, which is built on solidarity, on abundance, on the idea that all of us can win, and rejecting the idea of very zero sum, winner take all type of competition, which we know breeds scarcity and challenges beyond the individual, is the core message of the book.
Yeah, yeah. I know it's interesting because I love how you framed the beginning of the book of kind of like myths that we're taught to be competitive when in reality, like historically, for the time that humans have been on the planet, and you talk about this, that it's the unique advantage of collaboration that has enabled our survival. We need each other. And so I'm just so curious, like, why we're being taught to be competitive when it's against human nature. Like, why do you think we went this direction?
Yeah. For many reasons. I think one of them is very much to do with this profit at all costs, hyper capitalism. We make a lot of money if we exploit, most people, and there's one sort of class that makes a lot of money at, but sort of at the profit of others. So I think as we organized into modern society, I think that was one part of it. And I think the idea behind scarcity is very, is this a word, exploitable? I think it's very easy to say, like, you better be fearful all the time. I've been looking at the research around fear, and it's so
Mm-hmm.
powerful. What a powerful motivator, mostly for bad, actually. In fact, even in Uncompete, I don't go into a lot of detail, but one of the things I kind of talk about later on, post the book, is making sense of how much, like, even a very individual thing, and hopefully one that's relatable beyond maybe some of the examples in the book, is I used to, I would go to the gym and I would exercise and prioritize my health, but out of fear-based reasons, right? This reason of like, oh, I'm not, if I don't do this, like everything will go belly up, and and then
Right.
as a result, a lot of that fear-based motivation to go to the gym or to prioritize my health was very haphazard, and I'd have like weeks of being really good at, quote unquote, good about it, and then weeks and months of like not being good about it. And I think people can relate to this in many different ways, whether it's addiction or whether it's other things as well. um, and when I was able to switch that from like fear based to this idea of like, I'm not comparing myself or competing with anyone else or trying to be a different person. I really just want to pour into myself and be the best version of me.
Mm-hmm.
That completely changed the equation. It changed how often I went to the gym. It changed how I prioritize my health. It changed a lot of things. And so to sort of bring it back to, the original question around like why we go against human nature, I think a lot of the way that modern society has been organized makes it so that it's very hard to actually lean into these natural instincts we have of collaboration and community, right? We see this again
Mm-hmm.
in even in the workplace. I think a lot of good research supports, for example, Dr. Amy Edmondson's work, whom I know we're both big fans of, around psychological safety. At the core of it, we really benefit as an organization and as individuals from working in teams where we feel like our teammates have our backs, right? It's good for the org, it's good for us as, as individual workers too. We know collaboration is really important. We know having each other's backs is really important. And yet, the way the system is designed is there's only one promotion. So I better get my sharp elbows out. Like maybe yesterday we were great collaborators, we got a great team project
Mm-hmm.
done, but today our boss said there's only one spot for that promotion. So, we're going to duke it out. And so I think what this moment in time and history demands of us is to ask, like, is this the way that we want to be, or is there another way we can
Yeah. How's this working for you? Like, that's what I'd love. I'd love for people to think about that more often. Like, is this really working for you? Like, do you love working all these long hours and fighting with your colleagues and that scarcity mindset? You're so right. Like the fear-based mentality, it works in the short term, but long term, you can't keep people scared forever. And that's my hope is that people will come out of this fog that we're in, or feels worse than that. And realize like this isn't what I really want. But I think when the default is competition, and I felt this, Ruchika, like reading your book, I felt myself so much in the pages of, oh, I absorbed this message. I absolutely bought into this narrative. And you and I were both raised by, strong women, which this is also like a love story to your mom of how she raised you. And I just love that as somebody that also had like a powerhouse woman raising me. And I, even in that context, I remember going to business school. And my mom was like, what? Business? Like, why are you doing that? Like, you're meant to help women and like other people. Like, that's what your calling is, Julie. It's like, I want to succeed in life. And this is what success looks like is making money, mom. And she was like, okay, like, whatever, you'll figure this out on your own. But it took me, Rashika, like so many rent cycles. Okay, I'm going to go back to business school and it'll be different. Then I'll go into consulting and it'll be different. Then I'll be my own business, it'll be different. And as many times as I tried to flip the narrative, like society kept winning. And so I wonder like what you would offer. Like there's so many great strategies here in the book, but for somebody like me that couldn't find their way through these systems, like what would you offer as some reprieve or some strategies to make sense of that?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I think I wrote this book for myself as much as I wrote it for others like me, right? At a time I'm launching a book where I'm not expecting huge reception for it. I think the idea is, hopefully some people will are looking at what's going on and wondering like what is the way out. But I think for a lot of people we're getting the message that actually the more cutthroat, the less collaborative, the more selfish you are, the more quote unquote successful you'll be. But I think that in that lies the core message of the book. Like, what does success mean to you? And I think in this book, I try and reject the idea that I was very much conditioned with. I'm a double immigrant. I'm a daughter of immigrants and I am an immigrant to this country as well. So I'm like a double immigrant. Um, and so the idea of like you're only valuable based on how productive you are, how much money you make, you only have a worth in society. Literally, your right to be in a country is based on how much you produce and how much money you make. To uncondition those ideas has been, a life's worth work of learning and will continue to be, right? I'm really on this journey. But again, the message that I'd have for folks like myself and, as you said yourself, is this idea of like asking yourself, what does success really mean to me? And does success mean working through pain and chronic illness and this idea of always feeling fearful and scared and lonely and burnt out? Or is there, is my definition of success something different? And again, I want to put this caveat on that for so many of us around the world, for so many humans, because of these systems, we have been, those fears are valid, absolutely. And I think for many of us who may have survived and now are at a place where we can choose, it has still become the default, right? It's still become the default to be like, even though actually, if I run the numbers, I probably could step back or I could take a rest or I could take a job that aligns with my values. We've just been conditioned to be in the scarcity sort of mindset of like we got to constantly be competing, we've got to constantly be bettering ourselves. So for me it's this question of like really trying to redefine, to define, actually not even redefine, define
Mhm.
what does success really mean to us? What does that look like in terms of having agency over your time, over your money, over your community? I think is the one thing that I really focus on this book. I write about how I went from thinking like, oh, like I can totally go it alone. I don't need anyone else. Like, of course, like, oh, my money will help me with childcare. My money will help me with everything else. That's why I should make so much more of it, to realizing like, oh no, like I really need community and humans are what I need to feel successful, being around other humans who enrich me, who make me feel connected and inspired, is so much part of what this book is trying to do.
I love that question. Like, what does success look like for you? It's one of my favorite coaching questions I picked up a long time ago. And it's a heavy question. It's a big question if you're really being honest with yourself. Is it money? You might say that at first, but like you just articulated, like dig deeper into that. And I doubt you get at a capitalistic answer. It probably has way more to do with other human beings and connection.
Julie, I wanted to say that there's this, I think about this so often because, my life, I have many identities, I wear different hats, as many of us do. One of the things I'm thinking a lot about is raising a 9-year-old son, thinking about the paradigms, which I think a lot of immigrants, whether they do it consciously or subconsciously or like in some way, shape, or form, is what were the norms I grew up with and what are the norms that I grew up with that I want him to have, like keep, and what do I want to like definitely discard. And one of the big ones, especially for a lot of South Asian men, whether they grew up in the West or back home in the East, was this idea like you don't need relationships, you don't need friends, right? Like the most thing is money and finances. And I know the New York Times has done an article around around how women do the job, heterosexual women in heterosexual partnerships disproportionately do what's called kin keeping and man keeping, right? They named two terms that like is on my mind since I read both of them. Kin keeping is like that labor of like, vacations and making sure like family is connected and, hosting holidays, remembering gifts, all of that. And then man keeping is trying to organize the man in your life, social life. And I've been thinking so much about this, right? Because of course, a big part of this came from, men should go out and make lots of money and they don't need relationships. But there's this huge loneliness epidemic that especially impacts adult
Hmm.
males. And so,
Hmm.
especially in the West. And so, when I think about this, I want to raise my 9-year-old son to like, especially prioritize friendships and social relationships and recognize that that too is very much a facet of success, no matter how much your work makes an impact. And hopefully he won't be motivated by only money, or at least derive his self-worth by how much money,
Hmm.
the way I did.
Hmm.
you know
Yeah. Well, much like your mother's messages to you, I'm sure your messages are going hard as well. And
so
I have an 11-year-old, and oh boy, the curious conversations we have about these topics. I have a lot of faith in the world because of young people, and I don't like to kick the can to them because they didn't create these problems, and it's unfair for them but someone's got to. And they just seem to have a lot more gumption and a lot more like access to information, and they need books like this to rethink this narrative. And they're asking bolder questions, like they're questioning authority more so than I think my generation certainly did. I was just like, okay, well, I kept saying that we need to have more meaning and purpose in this job, but no one's listening, so I guess I'll just comply. Just at some point, you just give up. It's like, I can't change this. I'm just one person. And they
yeah,
don't seem to think that way.
no, no, I don't. And I think it's also, in some ways, it's like when you're pushed against a corner, right? I mean, I think for a lot of young people, I've been looking at the research and also in conversations I have, climate change and the fact that like the climate crisis is real, it's at your doorstep. It's, having longer than ever summers, harsher than ever winters, like all of these um things are really at like on the doorstep in a way that like perhaps it wasn't for me. It wasn't, not even perhaps, it wasn't on my mind growing up, for sure. And now when I go back to the same place, when I go back to Singapore, I talk to young people who are like, it's like the heat is unbearable. And I remember it was hot when I was growing up, but now I'm like, when you talk to young people,
Hmm.
you're like, wow, like
Hmm.
this, and they make decisions as a result of it. I've met so many young people who are like, I really don't plan to have children because the impact on the climate is disproportionate. Growing up, I had never heard a single person say that that was on their mind when it came to making decisions about having children.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting one. That is a narrative that has definitely pivoted through this. And I think there'll be more pushbacks against traditional, like you said, modern society that's really defaulted, at least in the West, to capitalism for sure. And I feel like that's the undercurrent that your book is kind of pushing back against. And I wonder, Rashika, and kind of wrapping up, like if there was a corporate leader listening to this that had power and authority and maybe the ability to change some of these systems, like what would be a wish that you would have? Like if we could wave a magic wand and focus on a couple priorities, like what could we do to adjust the systems to make uncompete more of the default versus compete?
Yeah, this is such a good question. I think a lot more leaders will see, and probably if you sit down and you reflect, right? And so much of what I want the change to be is that very subtle part of the work that's hard and powerful, which is just start noticing, like, where does competition show up in your own life and especially in your organization, right? Like, how do competitive behaviors show up? How does scarcity, zero sum, winner take all behaviors, thinking and behaviors and actions show up? And in noticing then asking the question, like, was this worth it, or was it like who is this serving, right? Is it worth it, is I think some part of this. Like, I really want to just slow down that automatic process. The other part that I think is I'd love more leaders to do is to understand, like, collaboration and teamwork isn't sort of out there, as a nice to have. It really has such powerful impact, right, in delivering what we want the world to deliver and we want our organizations to deliver. And I think that again requires very much building team norms that are based on, like, we reward, we support, we encourage, and we reward behaviors that are around collaboration and not competition. So
Hmm.
definitely that. And I think the last part of this is also very much to do with modeling those behaviors, right? And we know this with leaders, with working with leaders. I write about the beautiful work and research around micro validations by Laura Morgan Roberts and other researchers in her team, around, like, the importance of these, quote, small micro actions, micro validations, um, especially to affirm people who have historically been left out in the workplace. And I think this is a place where leaders have so much of power. I feel really lucky because later today, after years, I'm going to be going for a drink with a leader whom, when I first moved to Seattle 13 years ago, I just reached out to someone connected us, and I said to this person, like, hey, I've moved to Seattle. I don't know anyone. I don't have any job prospects. I had, kind of, I moved as a journalist and there were no journalism jobs. And I just said, do you have any advice? Do you have any contacts? And he just, and he, he's really senior, and now even more so, obviously 13 years later, in the field of communication. And he literally, we had one conversation and he personally vouched for me for my first job in Seattle. And that changed the trajectory of my life, right? And this idea of, like, caring personally, making a personal like effort to make sure that people are being supported, and validated, is really important, especially those who have been historically overlooked. I think you can make such a difference in
Oh, that gave me chills. What a cool ally. Like, what
really excited.
changed
Yes.
the trajectory, right? Like,
True ally.
that's, and it doesn't take that much effort to help
Doesn't.
or support somebody, and it has such a massive impact.
Yeah.
And like you said, like when you reflect back on a day or in a performance review, or just when you put your head on the pillow at night, what are you most proud of? Like,
Yeah.
it's helping somebody, it's supporting somebody. It probably does not have to do with how much money is in your bank account, how much your paycheck is, but it's that fear flip that we can do that just gets us away from what really matters.
Yeah. And so much about what I'm trying to do with Uncompete is saying, competing is about the short term, right? Like, what's the next action? What is the next thing that's going to get me towards a goal, which is really in the short term. And uncompeting is about, like, what is the long term view on this? So, indeed, if you even take a long view, if you read notes from people who are on the deathbeds of who are kind of there when supporting people dying, 9 out of 10 times, I think actually 10 out of 10 times, nobody on their deathbed says, like, oh, I'm so proud of all the money I made, right? 10 out of 10 times people are saying, oh, I wish I had spent more time with the people I loved, or I'm proud of the fact that I have this beautiful community of people who love me. And so if you take a short-term view, competition sometimes is the way forward. But if you take the long-term view, it always makes sense to uncompete.
100%. What a nice place to land. So thankful for your work, Ruchika. Tell our listeners the book is out November 4th. Then
Yes.
compete. I've got tons of tabs in this one. Tell our listeners where to get the book, where to follow your work.
Thank you. You can go to uncompetebook.com, which is my website, and there are a bunch of awesome retailers. I will always put a plug for supporting your small local independent bookstore near you. This is a hard time for indie bookstores, so please do, or go to bookshop.org if you're in, especially if you're in the United States. And yes, thank you so much for supporting my work. And Julie is an incredible leader, a true ally. I don't always use that word as a noun, but Julie, you really are. Thank you so much for practicing allyship in so many ways.
Thank you. I know it's not a perfect word. I haven't found a better one yet, but we need our allies now more than ever. And I'm super grateful for you and just how approachable you've been over the years and what an amazing thought leader you are. So thanks for pushing us to be better.
And you. Thank you so much for this, truly.